Welcome back. We are glad you are still with us here tonight. Now, we want to talk about the Housing Fund levy. Even though there's been some reprieve for employers and their employees, that deduction will not happen at the end of this month. But there's still a lot of understanding that is required around this. And that is what the explainer tonight is about. The Housing Fund levy and exactly what it was meant to achieve. So I'd like us to just begin with some context first and understand where this all began. Now, in 2017, at the time that the president announced the Big Four agenda strategy, it was confirmed, or at least the statistics from the World Bank, were that Kenya needed 2 million low-cost housing units to meet the demand. And this was also confirmed by Habitat Organization, which then added that the deficit was growing by about 200,000 each year. That would mean that as of this year, that deficit of housing is at 2.4 million. So what was the problem they were trying to solve? It's two. One of supply and one of demand. On the supply end, most private developers are supposedly hesitant to build houses. One, because there's no market. People aren't buying them because they're too expensive. And also because the land for them was expensive. On the side of demand, for buyers like you and me who might want to own homes, owning a home was way out of reach. Mortgages were expensive. So the government thought they would be the go-between, that they would provide land and infrastructure for the private developers and then purchase those houses from them and provide them to you on the demand end at a rate that is affordable. That was the whole idea. And then came the Housing Fund levy. So they came up with that and decided that they would deduct 1.5% of your basic monthly salary to the fund. This was then made into law in the budget of this current financial year, 2018-2019. But I want us to take a look at just what this means in terms of salary scale, so you can get an understanding of what that 1.5% really means. If you earn anywhere between 15 and 30,000, the deduction would be about 225 to 450 shillings. If you earn between 30,000 and 50,000 a month, that deduction would be 450 to 750 shillings. And finally, if you earn up to 150,000, your deductions would look a little bit like that, 750 to 2,250. Remember, it's capped at a maximum of 5,000. Now, this is what you contribute, and your employer is supposed to match the same. Now, beyond that, also, it was important to note that they had categorized the homeowners. So for those who are earning up to 15,000 shillings, they would be eligible for social housing. For those earning up to 50,000, they would be in the low-cost housing, and those above that, up to 100,000 shillings, they would be able to get the mortgage cap. What would happen with all of this money, which would amount to about 55 billion shillings collected yearly from about 3 million salaried workers? That's those in formal employment. This money was then supposed to go into one fund, which they are calling the National Housing Development Fund, which will manage the funds set aside for planning and providing of social housing. The CS actually put it when he was on an interview here with our Sam Gituku. He said the money will be pooled and will then be used to attract investors who will say the money is already here, the land is already available. And then he talked about a buyback guarantee. So the private developers put up the houses, the government buys the houses from them and then gives them to you at what they're calling an affordable rate of between 7 and 8%, which is much lower than the market rates. However, in that Housing Act, the regulations that were put up for this, it says that the CS can actually determine that rate. So it is not necessarily fixed at 7 to 8%. Now, this money would be collected over a 15-year period. That is what was proposed. Now, that was supposed to provide 500,000 homes over the course of 5 years. That's from 2017 to 2022. Bear in mind, there's been delays with that, including even just introducing that fund now. So there is 43 months to go to the end of the Jubilee administration. How many houses would they need to build? Well, that would be about 11,627 houses per month, or the government would need to build 388 houses per day. Phase 1 was supposed to have 68,000 units, which were the 1,640 units in Park Road that they have been talking about, 20,000 in Makongeni, 5,000 in Charimoyo, another 3,500 in Starehe, and then phase 2 would then be in Mavoko, Portland, at the river, Mombasa, and Eldoret. And remember, these houses are to be built across the country if the government's plan is successful in Nairobi, Mombasa, Nakuru, Eldoret, and Kisumu. This is what the Housing Fund Levy is about. However, Kenyans have questions, and here are some of them. The first one is the criteria for allocating the houses. Now, it is important to state at this point that even once you get yourself into this program, 3 million people for 500,000 houses. It is not a guarantee. You are actually paying to get into a lottery that will then qualify that will then tell you whether you qualify not for a house, but for a mortgage to purchase the house. So that needs to be very clear. And the method of doing that, because they're saying they're trying to lock out the rich people and cartels, if you actually go to the site bomayangu.go.ke, they say they will assign an individual an automated score and to see whether they fall under low-cost housing bracket, social housing, or the mortgage gap. And they will go through the same procedure that you would go through if you went to the bank seeking a mortgage. They will ask for your M-Pesa transactions, your bank records, the KRA PIN to see whether you qualify. It is not a guarantee. And it is not a guarantee for a house, it is not a guarantee for a mortgage, but it puts you in there. Here's another question that a number of people are asking. What happens to employers who are already giving their employees a house allowance? Will this be a double taxation? Or will they have to drop some of these benefits that they give, including banks, by the way, who give their employers mortgages at way below market rates? What happens to them? Can they opt out? Because the government has said that this fund is mandatory, is statutory, and therefore is a must. Here is the other big question that you've seen a lot of people discussing on social media. The penalties to those who may steal from the fund. Remember, corruption is still a big discussion right now. And I just want to read you that part from the Housing Act that talks about it. And this was taken from the Housing Act of 1953. This regulation has not been updated, which stated that anyone who misappropriates the funds is liable to a prison term of just 2 years or a fine not exceeding 10,000 shillings or both. So consider an imprisonment of 2 years and a fine of 10,000 for a fund that will be collecting 55 billion shillings a year. Almost sounds like a slap on the wrist. I have 2 more questions for you. What is the role of county governments? Remember, according to the Constitution, the national government only deals with housing policy. The county governments are the ones that are supposed to deal with planning and development of housing. Finally, that National Housing Development Fund, into which all of these monies are supposed to go, has not been set up yet. Who will administer it? These people, will they be vetted by Parliament? Will this be at the discretion of the CS, or will it be at the discretion of this fund? Will it have the independence to be able to do that? So the government was proposing starting the deductions at the end of this month, but the housing fund itself has not been set up, which would actually be a bit of a longer process because it would have to go through Parliament. These and many more questions that continue to plague this housing fund levy that now stands suspended until the court makes its decision towards the end of next month. But the questions just won't go away, and there's many more where those came from, including whether the government can secure these funds and the fact that it is mandatory for everyone, including those who might want to do voluntary contributions. What happens if you're working now and you're supposed to retire in the next 5 years or 10 years? What happens if you die? Apparently the funds are supposed to go to your children. But remember, these funds are actually a liability because it is eligibility for a mortgage. Essentially, this money, consider it as that 10% down payment that banks ask for, because that amount of money can certainly not get you a house. Many of these questions that continue to plague the housing fund. But now you know how it works, and now you can continue to question this even as we await the court's decision at the end of next month. This is Tonight. We take a break. We'll be right back.